Hello, everyone. Welcome to DILAN Delivers, a free webinar series sponsored by DILAN Consulting Group in San Francisco, California. Today's topic is best practices from 2022 to take into the new year, featuring Drs. Eugene DILAN, Hassan Leonard-Pagel, and myself. My name is Paul Bayonne. I'm a senior consultant at DILAN. I'll be your online host today. Let's advance our screen here. Let me begin with a brief description of DILAN Consulting Group. We are a team of psychologists who work with organizations to build their leadership and team capabilities. Our motto is business is human. The way we see it, our clients are experts in their field of business, and we at DILAN are experts about people and about understanding and shaping their behavior. When we merge these expertise domains together, that collaboration helps leaders, teams, and individuals unleash the human potential that enables their organizations to thrive. The goal of our free DILAN Delivers webinars is to present content that you might find both interesting and helpful in your and your organization's work efforts. We are video recording this webinar for posting on DILAN's YouTube channel. You will soon receive an email from us with a link to this recording, as well as a link to a feedback survey about this webinar. On your Zoom screen, you should see both a chat button and a Q&A button. I will be monitoring both of those services for any questions that you submit, and then posing your questions to our presenters, including myself, either throughout the webinar or near its end, depending on how the webinar conversation is proceeding. And with that, let me now introduce today's presenters. First, we're going to start with Dr. Eugene DILAN. Dr. DILAN has more than a quarter century of clinical psychologist and international consulting experience. His work is grounded in what we just talked about a minute ago, the business as human philosophy, believing that as a team of psychologists here at DILAN, we are experts in understanding and shaping behavior. He has put that to use in his extensive experience in the consulting field for the past 20 plus years, has been the founder and CEO of DILAN now for coming up on a dozen years this winter in February. He's also a member of the Forbes Coaches Council for Forbes.com, and has served as senior consultant and other consulting duties for international consulting firms earlier in the 2000s and 90s. As we now switch over to Dr. Leonard-Pagel, she has over 20 years of experience in executive leadership, management, training, and practice. Her successes include helping companies define or redefine their vision, evaluate their systems, and create more effective leaders while integrating a DEI atmosphere. She's also, from early 2000s to just over under a year or two ago, served as adjunct faculty at Alliance International University here in the San Francisco Bay Area. She hones her skills in business and financial strategies using data to drive decisions, and she focuses on functioning as a strategic partner to provide insights that help drive organizational efficiency and strengthen overall organizational health. Further, she's completed the Cornell University Certificate Program in Diversity and Inclusion. For myself, I'm also all three of us are licensed psychologists here in the state of California. I have started off my consulting work as an internal person at Kaiser Permanente, was there for a decade or so, and then switched over to UBH, and then have now been doing consulting work, primarily executive coaching and organization development and leadership development through the development of individuals and teams, and doing other types of organizational and individual assessments here at DILAN, for about 6+ years or so. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen, and we're going to go ahead and turn this over for some opening remarks by Eugene. Eugene, take it away.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. This conversation is long coming in that we've been going through a world transition now for over 2 years. And so I'm looking forward to hearing from you, what your insights are, and we're going to share some of ours. and share some of our best practices. I want to start by kind of setting the tone a little bit in that I want to make sure that I really underscore that we've all together been going through a pandemic. There's economic uncertainty, which is an overlay on everything that we're seeing with our clients. The social justice movement and need in this country is still alive and present, and we're going to speak to that a little bit later. There's also domestic political unrest. There are international threats. Crime has become a big issue in this country, and homelessness, and some people are struggling with food insecurity due to the economic situation. And so I think it's just really important as professionals who are psychologists, who are consultants, and even HR professionals, our employees, our teams are coming to work with all of this stuff, not to mention the personal challenges that any human being might have, from a sick child, elderly parent who needs support, a divorce, all kinds of things. And so I think that in terms of best practices as we go forward, and what I'm seeing over the last year is that human component, the business is human, is really kind of coming to the foreground. And what I would say is that the challenge, to kind of succinctly say what I'm seeing, is that while fundamentally business is human, because business started because people had needs and they traded, and it was about taking care of the community. I don't think that business is necessarily human right now, or has not been. And in some ways, I think that is the struggle that we're seeing sometimes between employees and organizations, is trying to find a place where we're taking care of the human as well as taking care of the business, because if the business isn't doing well, then the employees won't have a job. And I feel like that's a little bit of the struggle that we're witnessing right now, is that we're trying to find the right sweet spot around how much can a company do. And I think that the answer isn't going to be straightforward, because smaller companies don't have the resources that necessarily big companies do in terms of being able to accommodate needs. And so in short, what I want to say before I turn it over to Hasi to say a few words, and maybe Paul, is that people are feeling overwhelmed. They're exhausted. I've seen this from company to company that I go to. I feel that people are still in the midst of re-examining their personal values and reprioritizing, and I think that economic situation is having an impact on what people are willing to tolerate. Some organizations are still under-resourced because they can't find the people, and this will vary depending on the industry. I'm personally seeing that there's a lot of service jobs that have gone unfilled, and there's people looking for jobs but don't want those jobs, and there's technical jobs that are a whole lot more competitive but not necessarily as many people for those jobs. And what I'm seeing is that the need for resilience is really important in terms of a skill that people need to develop. And with that, the need that we all have for connection. We're human beings, we're social beings. And in a lot of ways that contributes to how resilient we are. Change is at the speed of light, if not faster. And so shoring up those skills, really important. Empathy and the use of this that gets in the way of empathy. I see that as a topic that even in this medium, I can struggle with. And fundamentally basic leadership skills, because your frontline managers, those are the people who ultimately have to show the empathy, who ultimately have to help people to feel seen and heard. And the whole hybrid thing, well, I think organizations have accepted that that's the path forward to some degree. It's the how the companies are going to do it that is still in limbo and causing some people anxiety. So I'm going to stop there, hand it over to Hasi, and then we'll take questions. Paul will also chime in, and let's have this be a conversation. Thank you for joining us.
Great. Thanks, Eugene, and excited to be here. This feels so timely as we're ending this year and going into the new year, and still there's a lot of unknowns. So I'm going to take I'm going to kind of highlight some of the things that you mentioned, Eugene, through a DEI lens. And so some of the kind of the current state of what I've been hearing is this feeling of inclusion and the sense of belonging continue to be important to employees. According to the PwC Price Waterhouse Coopers global study, pay fulfillment and being yourself at work were the top priorities for people looking for work. As Eugene mentioned, companies need to continue to invest in their employees' development. So at, probably 3 months ago, there were a lot of job openings, and now there's job freezes because of the looming worry around the recession. So companies really need to reinvest or invest in their current workforce in order to hopefully make it so that there's not departures in the future. So not only is professional development important in terms of feeling connected, these stay interviews that there's been a lot of chatter, I've been seeing it in LinkedIn, are really important and vital, right? So given that we do not all work under the same roof all the time anymore, it's important for managers to touch base with their employees. So questions like, how are you doing? What do you need? How am I doing? And what do you need from me are really important in terms of maintaining engagement. And the other thing that Eugene mentioned, and again, a lot of clients that we've talked to who are leaders as well as those individual contributors or managers are really still, feeling uneasy about this flexible work environment and what it means if suddenly you have to come back to work in a hybrid schedule 3 days a week, or there's some mandate. And really the question is, why do I need to be in the office? Leaders have to be able to feel comfortable at least having a dialogue around this discussion, because simply saying you must in order to get your work done, we've had 3 years demonstrating good data, right, that we can do our work at home or even in a remote and hybrid environment. So really trying to tailor what needs to be done, what can be done at home and what can be done in the work environment is really important. And I think the path forward is, trying to develop some policies, but being flexible to iterate as, more information comes of how we, what workplace looks like in the future is going to be important. And then, as Eugene mentioned too, this level of stress, mental health, which, is part of our field, our trade, has been amplified in the workplace in terms of employees, HR leaders even asking us, how do we wrestle or provide support around mental health? We're not therapists. And really it's about mental health wellness. How do we not put a burden or stress on our employees to the point where they come home or they're at home and they're exhausted? So really trying to kind of look ahead at how do we navigate work or continue to navigate work in this new normal environment where people are, in a hybrid schedule, and that they have had to integrate work and life over the past 3 years because it has been a requirement. And now they're feeling as though there's a little bit of an imbalance because they're giving so much time to work and losing time with their kids, for example. Or if you're part of the sandwich generation, which I am, and you have an elder that you're taking care of as well as a young person, then it can feel even more difficult. And then a couple more things, and I'm going to punt it to my colleague, Paul. A lot of companies are deciding to invest in DEI leaders, which we think is great. The unfortunate part is that they're not integrating these leaders in a successful way. And so I think about it as kind of, when merger and acquisitions happen, there's a lot of effort and investment in creating these transitional plans or integration plans. And what I've heard from leaders, DEI managers, executives, all the way down to someone who's just helping with data, is that they enter into these systems with the idea that their task is to create strategy and solutions around diversity and creating inclusion. And they're not given access to data. So as part of any onboarding of a DEI leader or expert, the integration plan should include access and clarity around how they will be successful in doing whatever they've been tasked to do. And then I want to leave this one thing, and we can talk a little bit about it later. ESG, I don't know if a lot of people have been hearing about this. So that stands for environmental, social governance. So another question in the DEI space is, where does DEI fit into ESG? Now, when you think about social and governance and how it's described, it would make sense that it kind of lives there. But there is some concern from those of us in the DEI space, or there's conversation around, is ESG kind of the new fad, and that DEI is going to be left behind? So that's what I wanted to share as we kick off today, and I want to pass it to my colleague, Paul.
Well, what could I say that wouldn't seem like I'm parroting everything that has just been talked about for the last 10 minutes or so? I think the one thing that I'll add to that will be within the domain of executive coaching. In the executive coaching engagements that that I've been involved with during this pandemic phase, I think one of the things that has proved to be incredibly valuable to my coachees has been to have a safe, contained place to be able to bring what's going on in the workplace, these leaders, what's happening around them, what they see in the organization, what they see in their one-on-ones, what they see in themselves, bring it into almost like a coach's timeout on the sidelines of a field of play, where they can just sit there and know that, hey, this is a place where I can go ahead and kind of just think out loud and bounce some ideas off and really kind of chew the fat with someone to figure out what in blazes is going on around me, because things are happening at the speed of light in their workplaces on an everyday basis that they really don't have or take the time to be able to kind of think things through and take a pause. And so having that reflective containment field, whether it's for an hour or 45 minutes or an hour and a half, every week or two, just to catch your breath, think things through, and then start to figure out not only what's going on around me, but what's going on in here, because this is the instrument. The leader, they're their own instrument of how they're going to play things out within their environment. So they've got to be not only in touch and in tune with what's going on around them, they've got to be in touch and in tune with what's going on inside. Now, that might sound a little bit psychologically, we make sure that we put it in frame of what is happening in regards to the business objectives, what's happening in terms of what they're trying to accomplish with their teams or with their organizations. How does this reflect on the values of the organization? How does this reflect in what their behaviors are like that they see for themselves and others around them, so that they can fulfill the mission of the organization and really see that their values can be brought to life in a positive way, so they can execute and be able to make the organization succeed. That's how we spin it. That's how we work it with them, so that, yes, they use themselves as the vessel, as the vehicle, I should say, to be able to accomplish these things. But in order to really, tap into that business as human component and then put it into play, they need a safe space to be able to do it. That's where I think the executive coaching has been incredibly helpful for individuals, particularly during this pandemic when everything is upside down crazy. And I'll end there.
Thanks, Paul. I'm going to ask both of you some questions and kind of take a little bit of a facilitator role. Imagine that. So Hasi, I love that you shared, in terms of what's going on in the DEI space and people not getting the resources. But, it's been a couple of years, and as we know, things that happened here in America really precipitated this huge demand for DE&I, and I'm wondering what you're seeing in terms of demand and whether or not that has waned, and what do you think the implications of what you're seeing are? Because I personally have some ideas that I'm going to share, but I want to hear from you because I know that you really have been leading this for us. And Paul, of course, you can chime in there as well.
Yeah, so I would say that the issue around the social justice lens, right, which was kind of what propelled a lot of organizations to suddenly take part in this effort. And I just want to highlight, there are a lot of organizations that were doing this work way before George Floyd was murdered, way before the pandemic. And so there's an opportunity for companies who are continuing to try and navigate this space to look at the data on why these organizations have been successful. So I just want to put that out there. I believe that one of the things that I've been seeing more now is strategy. How do we think about making this long lasting, right, versus just a one and done. And investment that costs a lot of money, right, in terms of really from a change management perspective, which often this is part of change management, right? This is an initiative. And where I think it gets a little bit more complicated, and I know that we have a visual maybe that we're going to share, is that the societal context around what race means, what inequity around gender, sexual orientation, gender identity permeates the boundaries of an organization, right? And so I think that this is why these efforts are so much more complicated, and yet leaders and HR team, et cetera, whoever is responsible for integrating this initiative tries to apply the same approaches as if it wasn't something that permeated our, organizational boundaries. That we have seen kind of a decline in terms of coming in and wanting to, reaching out to consulting firms, and we're not the only one, because there has been a desire, if we believe that this is important, why don't we hire these roles, right? So we'll hire a VP of chief diversity officer, or we'll hire a diversity, equity, inclusion manager. And again, because I'm in a lot of these circles, the challenge that people who are hired into these positions is they don't have access to the data that is important in order for them to do their job, right? And so there's still a need to kind of find a place to support them and help guide them on what are some things that they can do in order to ensure that they are successful and have a sense of power, because they're given all this responsibility coming in the door and not giving the tools in order to be successful.
Hasi, I have a kind of follow-on question. There are some pundits who basically say that right now there's a good sense that most organizations who have put in an effort have done a really good job at developing cognitive literacy of what DE&I is, but that there seems to be a gap between knowledge and behavior.
Right.
And so can you speak to that? And Paul, I think there's a question that you can follow on afterward.
Yeah. There are 3 questions that have come in. So,
okay.
Hasi, go ahead.
All right. So, as we know as psychologists, that it's one thing to learn something neurologically, right? In terms of thinking about, okay, for example, there's a lot of emphasis on unconscious bias. So all of us, those who've had organizational, efforts around DEI have done unconscious bias. So it's one thing to become aware. It's another thing to practice it, right? And to internalize it. And why is this important? And how can I be empathic and understand that if I was in this person's shoes, that would be a really awful experience navigating the world, always wondering, like, am I being passed over because of the color of my skin? Am I being not included in the decision making because I'm a woman, right? So it takes time to shift and relearn, especially if you've navigated the world from a privileged position. So you can have the kind of intellectual understanding, but until there's more practice around what the experience is like, then there's going to be a disconnect.
Yeah, I have just a follow-on comment, and then I'm going to turn to Paul. I swear. So the thing that I sometimes struggle with around this, Hasi, because I agree exactly with what you said, is that are the work environments that people are in providing the opportunity to practice? So I know firsthand that some of the organizations we work with are fully committed,
yes,
but the majority of the people in the organization are still white and male.
Right.
And so those opportunities to actually practice and have those interactions where you develop the empathy are just lacking. And so that's kind of in my mind, how do we overcome that? And now I'm going to shut up now. I'm going to
so wait, let me see if I can respond really quickly, because I think that this is an important piece that you're highlighting, Eugene. There is a strong desire, and we saw this over the last 3 years, that people, and often those who sit in leadership, and just, not to stereotype, because like the data show, our white males feel compelled to do something. How that then plays out or how that trickles down or cascades down to the organization is often the challenge, right? Because I think that the missed opportunity for some of them is have my team do this. And it's like, no, the commitment has to include you all along the way. It's going to be uncomfortable. You're going to be called to the carpet. And that's part of the process, right? If you can't model that you're willing to have these difficult conversations and be open to shifting how your team, how your board looks, right? Who you're bringing in terms of these conversations, then people are going to just feel like it's lip service, right? So I think that to your point, Eugene, that like there's a commitment, but the how and the long-term commitment and requirement in order for it to be successful is a little bit tenuous. Paul.
Okay.
Paul.
Our first of 3 questions comes in, and this is in regards to Hasi, when you were speaking just before you started responding to Eugene's questions,
Okay.
and you were talking about the data that needed to be looked at. So the question is, what kind of data do you mean?
Okay. So data these are things that we look at when we're going in. Salary, positions, demographics associated with those positions, gender, ethnicity, if it's a global company, nationality, what kind of professional development opportunities have individuals been able to get, what kind of courses are there, looking at performance management or 360s, looking at hiring managers, interview panels. I mean, there's a whole host of things to really, if you think about it from the employee life cycle, from recruitment, who's getting in the door, who's making the decisions for the person to get in the door, and then how are they retaining that person? So that's the handoff from the HR to the hiring manager, right? So,
Hasi, if you feel comfortable, can you mention the 5 pillars when we do an organizational assessment? What are the 5 pillars? Because
sure.
that's a kind of high level. So
Okay.
I think,
Let's see if I can rattle it off the top of my head.
Yes.
So diverse workforce, that's who or how people look, right? Employee engagement and inclusive culture. So that's what my experience is as an employee. And accountable leadership, that's the responsibility of my leaders to ensure that, things like pay equity are being managed, performance 360s, if that's what your performance and management, development opportunities. And then the 4th one is external partnerships. So who are the vendors? Who are you partnering with as an organization? Because that is important too. Like we're a minority business owned company, right? So that would be considered that an organization is really putting the effort to, again, practice what they preach. And then the final is marketplace visibility. So what's your brand look like, right? Because applicants, that's how they're looking for jobs right now. And they have for the last 5 years is they go on social media, they look at your website, they look at your leaders, because I've often found when I'm working with companies around DEI, it's like, okay, so this is great. You have a mission statement. It's great. You have definitions. It's great that you're embodying, based on what you're packaging your brand around diversity. Now let's go look at your leaders. I'll wait. Okay. So there's a disconnect here and applicants are going to see that.
And just so you clarify, we use these 5 pillars and we look at all different kinds of data underneath those pillars. Again, it's impossible to look at every single piece of data potentially under those pillars. So we try and be mindful to manage budget and time with our clients, but we try and create a comprehensive assessment that then informs how we move forward. Paul, the next question.
Yes. Question comes in.
Can I add one more thing? That as part of our data, the way that we think about data and initiatives and change management is that the goal is to then help you build a strategy, right? So it's not just, here's the data, do something about it. We really want to look at, think about this like you're doing your strategic plan, and that the DEI efforts should be mapped in a way that is longstanding, because otherwise it continues to feel like this evil stepchild that no one wants to address or do anything about. All right. I'm going to take some water now.
In terms of DEI, how important would you say it is for staff to see the managers and directors following the processes and procedures that they are implementing onto the staff.
All right. So I will look to, I could talk about this all day, but I have other, colleagues here who are well-versed in DEI. So I would like to start
Paul,
that.
I think to Hasi's point, can you share that infographic now? We were going to save it for the end, but we'll share it now. Because I
Sure.
think that's really helpful in terms of answering this question. And the short of it is that fundamentally we believe that individual. Could you put that in?
Yes, I'm putting it in. I'm trying to just get there.
We fundamentally believe that individual behavior is really the point of change. And so as a leader, even more so, because you live in a fishbowl and people are looking to you to see what's okay, what's not okay, what's normal. And so individual behavior leads to, over time, to group norms. And the group norms then drive the organizational culture. And so when you ask, is it important for people to see their leader kind of walking the talk? Absolutely. Because what's good for the goose is good for the gander. And also, it's not just seeing the leaders do it successfully. It's also some transparency around when you have a flub, because
Right.
those moments kind of give people permission to bring to you when they have had a misstep. And so then it kind of becomes this environment where we're all engaged in learning versus blame or shame or any of those things. So fundamentally, the answer is yes. It's very important. And truly, what I would say about this infographic as well is that this is not only an answer to your question, but this is also the answer to many, many of the things that ail us. If someone is struggling with setting boundaries at work and trying to manage their workload and those things, a leader modeling setting boundaries, begins to give them permission to do it. If a leader takes time out to go and learn new skills and supports spending money on helping to develop people, then you're making that the norm again, and it becomes a culture where people are learning. And so regardless of what the issue might be, this is a little bit of a map, because at the end of the day, we can't change other people. We can create an environment where it's safe to fail, safe to try, but ultimately, each of us is on our own journey in terms of learning. So
and this map actually continues because it's an iterative process. Not only does then the behavior drive the norms, drive the culture, but the culture is now going to drive the individual behavior, in various different directions. And so you get this iterative circular process that goes around and around, and things are going to get amplified and they're going to get muted depending on what is happening in this setting. Now, Hasi, you look like you're ready to jump in on for the next point here, but
no, go
okay,
for it.
all right, okay.
I was just trying to read the question that just popped in, but I'm paying attention.
Okay, the thing to remember about all of this is none of this happens in a vacuum. Okay, everything is contextual because you have a societal context in which this dynamic, this circular iteration is always unfolding. So you cannot take the organization or the people within it or the processes within it, divorce it from the larger society in which that organization exists. And for us here, with the Western United States or the Western world, or some type of global culture, something that's going on that's going to now have an impact and an influence on all these things that are happening. And it's going to, be cross-pollinating back and forth.
Go ahead. What I would add to what you just shared, Paul, is that we've had, in the past, and I'll just use race because as a Black woman, I've had, and many of my family members are Black. We've had the experience of racism and discrimination in our work environment, right? Because of the pandemic, I have felt that there has been more of a shift. Not that anyone can take away my experience of, discrimination, and I don't expect them to do that, right? I'm not of the mind that it's someone else's responsibility they need to be responsible for their behavior. With the pandemic, I felt like there was suddenly this opportunity, even though it was awful, where we all suddenly realized how small we were in the world, right? You know, that our plans for the future, longevity, our, you know, and genetic, you know, the ancestry in terms of longevity, suddenly none of that mattered, right? You know, how much you exercise, none of that mattered. And so we had this opportunity as a collective species to really say, wow, we really need to work together, right? Now, I know like politically that there was some dissension, but there was a moment where we all realized like, we really need to work together. We're in this together. And I think that I leverage that when talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and even sharing my own story and journey, to start with, we all have a story to tell. We all have a journey. It doesn't matter how you look, but we have all felt othered in the past. And so I think that societal context, you can leverage it in a way that really helps start the conversation.
Thanks. I'm going to pivot us just a little bit to kind of focus a little bit on individual contributors and leaders, because I want to make sure that we talk about that as well. So
Eugene, before
yeah.
you do that,
Oh,
Eugene,
go ahead.
we do
Go ahead.
have
Go
one
ahead.
more
Go
question
ahead.
that came in regards to the DEI domain, and let me read it here. One of the things that is hard is that managers need to figure out that in a DEI organization, some face some truly difficult situations. Managers need to truly approach on an individual basis and see how they can best support and figure things out, supporting staff that are facing. As an example, a very sick child. And if we have demonstrated that working from home, that we can get things done, then that's what we've demonstrated. So managers should be able to work with those colleagues and staff that cannot be treated like everyone else. The question here, how best can you guide managers and senior managers with issues of such? So when you have that type of situation, what's the advice to give about how to proceed?
Well, I mean, if so this is specific to childcare, right? But I know that it's a broader conversation. And again, I believe that it's important to, and I've heard people say this, if there's a question, if you as my manager suddenly have a question about my ability to do my work at home, please share with me what you're seeing in my performance, me showing up in terms of meeting times, et cetera, that can help me understand why it's suddenly becoming the shift that you don't trust me, because it's really about trust. And I think that that's what managers or leaders are not integrating in their understanding of why people are having such a strong reaction that you must come back to work to demonstrate that you're doing your job. So that would be kind of the question. I would punt it back to the manager to say, what I'm hearing is it sounds like you were not trusting my ability to do something. And I'm open to hearing what you're seeing that's different.
I want to link this back to the idea of empathy that I mentioned earlier. I mean, I do think that as a manager, you have to operate within the boundaries that have been set in terms of, for the organization, what the policies are. However, I do think that advocating on people's behalves, seeking to try and change the policy, but because in here is where empathy kind of comes in. What kind of an organization do you want to be? And that's where organizational values come in. Because if you're saying your values are to be human-centric, but then you're saying, hey, I don't care that your kid is sick, right, that's not congruent. And so, I think it's really on leaders to constantly be kind of thinking about what are the organizational values and how do those inform the decisions that I am making from day to day, including how I respond to someone's need. If in the context of trying to retain people, if you say no, and this person actually has critical knowledge and has been a great contributor, you miss an opportunity to create a commitment because it feels very one-sided. You want from them, but you're not willing to give back. So again, I don't think that there's an easy answer to this, but I think that fundamentally, if you are looking at it from a human lens and you're bringing in some empathy and you have a good knowledge of what your organizational values are, then I think you can make choices that work. And remembering that you can always change your mind. You can experiment with things. And right. I think that's one of the beautiful things that COVID has taught us is that is that while in the previous world things were kind of set, you set it and forget it. In the new world, the more that we can learn to improvise and to I think pivot as needed, because the market and people demand that from us at this point. It cannot be that this is the only way that we are.
Can I
Go ahead.
add something to what you're saying too, Eugene? So the one-on-one relationship with the manager employee is important, and it's an opportunity for teaming and collaboration, right? So to offer that employee, or even they might have done some footwork to say, well, what are the kind of priorities that you need to manage right now, and is there anyone that you can delegate them to temporarily, right? So again, it's this idea that we're in it together, versus your personal issues or your challenges are not something that we can tolerate right now, even though that might not be what you're messaging, but that is what it can feel like as the employee.
I think an
This kind
additional
of
thing that can
go
go
ahead, Paul.
along with that is that what I've been seeing, especially over the last, say, year and a half out of this 3-year pandemic that we're on so far, has been organizations are now saying, maybe one size doesn't fit all. And so if they break it down to, for example, the individual teams within organizations, and empower those teams, the leaders and the people who make up the teams together, to collaborate in a way so that they can jointly figure out what are the things that we actually really do need to try to accomplish here, and what are some of the best pathways for us to do this. If we perhaps brainstorm together and we all figure, we actually have to be on site because we make widgets, we have to be inside the factory and putting them all together, we can't outsource those to our houses. But if it's a different type of process where we can go ahead and distribute this out in a different work methodology, if people feel as though they're collaborating and they feel like they had a stake and a say-so in being able to come up with whatever the overall plan is going to be, the buy-in that you have from all the team members into that skyrockets, as well as the feeling of, hey, not only do I have this buy-in, but I've got some skin in the game, and my loyalty just shot up too. So people's productivity and their ability to be able to accomplish the goals of the organization just skyrocket. It's a win-win-win all the way around.
So what I want to say is that this kind of speaks to some degree to the psychological contract, and that's kind of like the unspoken agreements between employers and employees. And I feel like over the last 2 years, employees and employees have kind of been renegotiating this unspoken contract, but it's not been spoken about. It's being spoken about through our behaviors and decisions that are being made, but there's not an explicit conversation around what are the appropriate expectations for me to have from my employer, or for my employer to have from me as an employee. And I think that if we can take if we can make it explicit, I think we would be more effective at beginning to trying to negotiate how it is that we go forth in a win-win kind of dynamic. So I want to add on here one of the insights that I've had, because we promised to give you some insights. And one of them is that to some degree, we're kind of expecting people to jump back to pre-COVID way of doing things and productivity. It's almost like, forget that COVID happened, get back with the program to where we were. And I think the problem is that people aren't back where they were. They've evolved, they've changed, their needs have changed. And so I think in terms of this psychological contract, kind of speaking about what do people need now versus what they needed then. And I also think along those lines that because people are still feeling overwhelmed, we as leaders need to start thinking about how do we chunk work down to manageable components, so that we can try and relieve some of that overwhelm. Simplify. Some of the work that I've done with clients is really around trying to define what are the pieces that we need to keep working on, and what are the things we can put on the side, so that in the short term we can give people a chance to kind of reacclimate to the world as it is, or a chance to kind of get back to center. Because again, that's probably a better word, that people haven't quite gone back to center,
Right.
but we're expecting them to operate as if they have. And so we need to chunk things down. We need to simplify. Again, we need to bring that the empathy and the values in terms of, again, how we're discussing and redefining the way that we're going to work together.
Yeah, and what I would
or I
add
think
is
that one of the new priorities that really kind of has really come to the forefront is that the new center is a new priority, has been arrived at for individual contributors and team members and even leaders. The things that were important 4 years ago, 3+ years ago, have changed. And maybe people are still figuring them out right now, and that's fine. But for those who are figuring them out, and for those who have landed on a new set of priorities within their organization, that still needs to be the new focus, as opposed to, hey, let's rewind the tape and let's pick up where we left off, 3 years and 1 month ago, and we'll kind of reset the program from there. The game has changed. The setting has changed. And so looking at what the priorities are anew, and defining them, and then figuring out how can we as an organization best fulfill those priorities, that's the new focus that needs to happen moving forward.
And I think the other thing that the two of you are highlighting is employees have to be the focal point. That's what it was 3 years ago, when suddenly there was a shift, and it has to be how you guide and navigate the future or the pathway forward. And so, Eugene, for example, the chunking of data is really important, and leaders shouldn't assume that they know what that looks like, right? So the employee feedback loop is everything, right? I mean, that really helps you get the pulse of like, okay, we were approaching business this way because that's what we're used to. Now we need to modify because the people on the ground are saying this isn't working anymore, right? So that flow of communication is really important. And it also provides the opportunity for creativity. You need that in order for a business to be successful. You can't just do things the same. You won't survive, right? And then finally, I think the other insight that I talked a little bit about is mental health needs to be part of your wellness package. You don't have to suddenly expand EAP, or that's the only opportunity. There's a lot of things that help us maintain our mental health. And so communication with your employees is really important, not just the annual survey, right? Upskill your managers if they don't feel confident in doing that, so that they can do these stay interviews, right? And pulse their team, and also communicate that information up, right? And then I want to underscore this, that the workplace environment where your staff have to do work, or where their options are, that's not going to change. Flexible work environment is not going away. And again, there's been lots of organizations out there who are doing that way before the pandemic. So use the data from the past to allow you to help guide you on how to be successful going forward. And data. That's what I would say.
Yeah, there's lots more to share, but I want to make sure that we give you an opportunity to share some of the insights that you're having, or ask some more questions. So if you want to take a moment and put those in, and in the meantime, I'll just say while we're waiting for those to come in, that developing your people is really where it's at. A, because your frontline leaders need the skills in order to be successful. B, because when you're developing people, you're kind of giving them a little bit of job security, and that now if they end up not having a job, they have better skills, so they're more competitive. And the thing about developing your people is that to remember that it doesn't always have to be bringing in consultants, as much as we would like that, because that's what we do. But kind of doing job sharing, so people are kind of learning about other jobs. If people are not feeling challenged in their work, then they're not going to engage as much. And so kind of, and given that organizations, as Hasi said, have some job freezes or there's shortages, again, allowing people to explore other opportunities that aren't necessarily what they used to do could actually be a win-win, because again, it creates a bench for the organization, and it keeps people engaged, and it gives people opportunities if for some reason things don't work out where they are. Paul, did any questions or comments come in?
No, we had no new questions or comments have come in the last 20 minutes yet. So to our attendees out there, you've been hearing us kind of wax philosophical and practical, I should say, but both in regards to these topics. Please, what are your thoughts? What are your reactions? Is there anything that you found particularly intriguing or something that you said, whoa, did they just say that? I never thought of that before, or I can't believe they just said that. That doesn't make any sense to me. Please, any type of reaction that you have. DILAN Group, you're phenomenal. Thanks for your time and fantastic guidance. We love the praise. We also would love to hear your questions and comments about what types of things this is kind of bringing up for you. What is this stimulating? What type of reactions are you having to hearing these things? Are these things that maybe have been percolating in the back of your mind, but you didn't have the vocabulary, you didn't have the language to kind of put your finger on it? And are we hitting the mark? Do you think? What anything out there? Please chime it in Q&A chat.
All right. I'm gonna while Paul is waiting for questions, I'll talk about a few of the things, and Hasi can as well. A few of the things that I've noticed is that organizations, I think to some degree, are really committed to retention these days. I really think that rather than hiring, I see a lot of how do we make the work environment one that helps people. I've also seen a lot of people to try to, I think, be as flexible as possible. But again, where I'm seeing the struggle is at what point, if you bend too much, will it impact the business in a negative way? So those are some of the things that I'm seeing, and it looks like there's some sort of a comment.
Yes, comment just came in. In terms of informing management/directors that the trust isn't quite there, and or letting them know that they are not being equitable, how do you suggest we approach that conversation?
I have a good. My first thought is to stay away from you statements, because you statements usually kind of set up some sort of a dynamic to get defensive. And if you speak about your personal experience, I am not feeling, right. Or when this policy was rolled out, my first thought was versus coming at someone with accusation, or you can even ask a question. Hey, how do you think that policy is impacting people, or how do you think people are thinking about that policy? So kind of trying to engage people in a generative conversation.
Right. Or even I'm curious, right? That's always a good starter too. I'm curious why this policy was put in place, or have you received any feedback around how people are responding to it, et cetera? Because again, it takes the specific dynamic and it kind of amplifies it across the organization, that it's not just about me. There are probably others who are wondering. And so here's your opportunity to kind of engage in a dialogue around it.
I would also say this. It's important to recognize that our leaders are also human. Right. and I think that sometimes we expect them to always make the right decisions, respond in a timely fashion. They're not supposed to be emotional. And guess what? We are. We also have our own challenges. We are also struggling to find the right answer, and sometimes we're not going to get it right. And I think if somehow we can be a little more transparent, that hey, I want to experiment with this and put a time on it. Let's try it out for a month, 2 months, 3 months. Let's reserve the opportunity to change our minds if we need to. I think that kind of can begin, I think, to create a different kind of conversation.
We have 3 questions that just popped in. One was, it'll be great to start this great collaboration and genuine participation with management and staff, not just having us listen, but start, quote, getting our hands in the soil before we respect any garden. So it's actually, you've got to get in there and do the work with them. Yep. Okay. Do you see that organizations are willing to invest in executive coaching more than in the past in order to retain their employees? What's the balance you see of talent development to keep good people versus remedial coaching as a last-ditch effort to avoid letting someone go? Thoughts?
Yeah, so I think that most of the time at the senior levels, when I get a call, it's because there's some sort of an opportunity that needs to be addressed. I don't know that there's a straight answer. I think at the lower levels, I'm seeing investment, but what I'm seeing is that sometimes the investment isn't enough. In that when you give someone 5 or 6 coaching sessions, there's a limited amount of work that you can do at that level. There's an investment at the lower levels in leadership development and rolling out programs. We've had some of that work. But again, I think that at the higher levels, more often than not, it's not proactive. It's not giving you a thought partner or a place to seek support. And, more often than not, the higher levels, it's because there's some sort of a problem. Hasi, you were going to say something.
And where I would see there's more movement towards kind of a proactive team executive coaching level is the inclusive leadership movement, right? So there might be some offshoots of individual executive coaching because you realize there's more work that needs to be done with those individuals. But I am seeing more and more companies invest in like what we really need to understand what an inclusive leader looks like. Therefore, we're going to invest it, maybe all of our top leaders will go through a program. So it's not individualized necessarily. And, the hope is that there's some opportunity on the end of those programs where there is the one-on-one to kind of really ensure that any additional needs in order to execute that effectively, inclusivity is happening on the individual level with an executive coach.
There's another comment there.
Yes, we have one more comment that came in. Actually, someone was chiming in regarding their own practice in regards to mental health issues and wanted to share it with the group. Principles that we've communicated related to mental health with some success. 3 things. Number 1, mental health is health.
Yes.
And an organization whose core value is safety, this is a great hook. So if you're already in that biz, you go ahead and play on that. Number 2, mental health initiatives make financial sense for every business. The data are overwhelming and compelling.
Yes.
And number 3, though it may be inherently frightening, emphasizing that any start at demonstrating concern is better than nothing.
Right.
Leaders may fear making things worse and aren't typically comfortable diving into personal concerns, but are comfortable voicing you're important to the organization. So there is your entree to be able to just let someone know that they've been recognized about whatever struggle is happening here, and that what can we as an organization, what can I as your manager, what can we as a team do in order to help or give some type of assistance, at least recognizing that there is an 800-pound pink tutu elephant in the room. Calling it out is better than silence, because silence is deafening.
And I want to say thank you to my colleague, Sherry Richards. She and I worked together for 8 or 9 years in the consulting space. So thank you for that. Hasi, before I wrap up, what do you want to say?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I appreciate Sherry use. Mental health is health. And there's been a lot of time and energy put around physical health in the work environment. You have a gym membership, et cetera. But the mental health piece is equally important. And so for companies not to feel put off or uncomfortable around, mental health, mental illness, right, there's mental health that we all have, right? And so not just thinking about the extremes and being concerned that if they open the door that they're going to be flooded with someone's sense of overwhelm and anxiety and not be able to tolerate it. So thank you for saying that, Sherry.
And what I'll kind of add to that and kind of bring this to a little bit of a close is that the role of the leader and HR is changing, or is changed. And mental health is one example of that. You weren't supposed to bring feelings or problems to the workplace, but the world has changed and we're integrated. And before, it was integrated in a very one-directional way, and that the cell phone and the computer could get you to keep working for as late as possible. Right. But time has changed and the pendulum has shifted in that now I think it's appropriate and helpful for people to understand that they can bring their whole selves to work, and that the role of the leader in HR has to change to, in some ways, accommodate that. which means that leaders may need different skills and HR may need different skills. It's not just about transacting things anymore. It's about how do you support the whole person. So with that, I'm going to bring us back to that one slide. Individual behavior over time creates the group norms. Over time creates the organizational culture. And that is especially true if you're in a leadership position. And it's not just what you say and do, it's what you fail to say and do. When you don't address things that need addressing, that also establishes a norm. So with that, I want to thank Hasi, I want to thank Paul, and I want to thank all of you for joining us. And we'll see you next month at DILAN Delivers. Bye now.
Have a wonderful holiday.
Happy holidays, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Last slide here. If you need to get a hold of us, these are our contact information, phone, email, and on the web. Again, we will be picking up our DILAN Delivers webinar series starting in the new year. Thank you very much for joining today. Have a good day.